everyone, and hope everyone is doing well. We'll be calling to order the meeting for the Charter Revision Commission, and I suppose as we get started, we'll just do a quick roll call. So I'll just call down the list of individuals. I did speak with Commissioner, sorry, my mind is blanking out. But the chair, Mansfield, Commissioner Mansfield, we did speak, and she will not be present tonight, but shouldn't be an issue. We have a lot of information to cover. So we'll just get started with a quick roll call. Commissioner Stephen Waddy.
Here.
Commissioner David Kaufman.
Present.
Commissioner Larry Telford.
Present.
Commissioner Ashley Hanglighter.
Present.
Commissioner Tom Fleckenstein. Mr. Fleckenstein, are you here? Don't see. Okay. And then, as previously discussed, Commissioner Mansfield will not be present tonight. So we do have a pretty, we've got a pretty robust agenda tonight. We have a number of guests that will be joining us this evening. Before we get started into the agenda, though, does anyone have any questions about the minutes from the February 28th meeting? Those were loaded into the Google Drive. Does anyone have any questions or objections, or can I get an motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting?
So ordered.
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right. Excellent. All right. Well, we'll move right into the discussion today. So we do have a number of items of prominent relevance. We do have a number of people that are present tonight to be, to give us some insights on the things that we are looking through. We are going to be reviewing several articles from the Charter. We'll be discussing any potential changes. We'll be studying some of these items at the request of the Anne Arundel County Council. The Commission does have the ability to make any other amendments outside of those recommended from the Anne Arundel County Council. The end goal of this is to produce a report in which we make any recommended changes to the Charter. We do have a number of county staff that are in attendance, and they will be giving us a little bit of background. They'll be available to answer any questions and provide any context for the issues that we will be dealing with. So I'll just quickly go through the list of the staff that are present, and then we'll get into some of the specific items. So we do have Lori Blair Klausmeyer, who's a deputy county attorney and does an incredible amount of the heavy lifting for this commission. Really appreciate her work, and she will be here as a resource. Pete Barron, Director of Government Relations from the Anne Arundel County Executive's Office, will be present to address any issues. We also have Tricia Wolford, who is the Anne Arundel County Fire Chief, as well as Karen McQuaid, County Controller, Ann Badowski, the Personnel Officer, and Christine Anderson from Central Services, who presides over that. So that's just a list of those that are present. I actually didn't look through to see if everyone is present, but I don't know if anyone had any presentations planned or if they were just gonna be available for resources, but I suppose we'll give anyone an opportunity at this
Recording in progress.
To deal with that. So any questions about the county staff or any questions or remarks from members of staff before we get into the issues on the agenda?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Mr. Barron.
No opening comments. Ready to get to work and get through your pretty robust agenda for the night. So ready to go when you are, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Barron. All right. Well, I guess getting right into it, we have the matter related to the fire department. These are issues 10 and 11 from the resolution. I think at this point in time, it might be appropriate just to get a brief overview of the resolution. And Ms. Klausmeyer, you've done a really good job of just kind of summarizing the issues that we're discussing and giving a little bit of background. So if you wouldn't mind just, getting us started with this conversation on these items.
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about this at other meetings about the relationship between the volunteer fire companies and the Anne Arundel County Fire Department. And I did share some information with you, or I think Ms. Corby shared it, about the fire tax, which is the one item. The other has to do with the relationship between the two, between the volunteers and the career. So on the fire tax, the pages that I've referred you to in the green book, the charter framers wrote about how taxes should not be dedicated at their source. And I think they gave a really good example of the various types of taxes, and then kind of what happened to those taxes, which wasn't always related to the tax itself. And so they were very strong proponents of, or I should say very strong opponents of having all these various taxes dedicated at their source, and very strong proponents of just having single tax revenues going into a general fund that then funded the county government. On the relationship between the volunteer fire companies and the professional fire companies, as I've explained before, the county does provide some funding for the volunteer fire companies. They are required to sign reciprocity agreements with the county. And the form of those agreements, there's two different agreements. One is if the county owns the station, and one is if the fire department or the volunteer company owns the station. Those agreements cover a number of things, including the staffing that will be at each station, both the volunteer staffing and the professional staffing. And also they kind of form the relationship between the two, the volunteers and the county. If there's any more specifics you want on that, I'll be happy to answer questions. I know we have, I thought we had the fire chief. Yes, we do. There she is. Okay. Here to also can kind of talk a little more about how that works operationally. And my understanding is every station has both every volunteer station also has county personnel, and she can probably talk a little bit more about how all of that works together. Unless you have other questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
Well, so it does look like we are dealing with two relatively separate issues, and so I think out of respect for the chief's time, I think we should start our discussion about the relationship between the paid fire personnel and the volunteers. And Chief Wolford, if you don't mind, can you provide us just a little bit of background of your understanding of the situation right now and what your recommendations might be as it relates to the county charter, perhaps defining or clarifying that relationship?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all, commission members. Thank you for having me. I do have a breadth of knowledge, obviously, in the fire service, but specifically, so I'll just give you a little overview that helps put it in context. Can everybody hear me okay clearly before we get started? Excellent. So the best way is to understand the fire service is there are three types of fire departments. There are all career fire departments, there are all volunteer fire departments, and then there are combination fire departments, which means part is volunteer and part is career. We are lucky enough in Anne Arundel County to be a combination fire department. To give you an idea of our size and our scale, we're one of the top 50 largest combination departments in the country. Our neighbor Prince George's County is the #1 largest, and we are right behind them. So you have an idea of the scale, serving 600,000 residents. I'm actually we had a slideshow for you. In the interest of time, I'm going to make sure that everybody is just clear on the information. We have almost 1,000 career firefighters, and we have approximately 400 operational volunteers. There are also about 950 administrative volunteers. So here we now have three types of different firefighters. We have 31 fire stations. So within those 31 fire stations, there's a component of which ones are owned by volunteers and which ones are owned by the county. Now, all 31 fire stations are fully career staffed. When the volunteers come in at their stations, those volunteer firefighters add an additional complement. So if the career folks are always staffing an engine and an ambulance, and then the volunteers come in, we have the opportunity to put another engine in service or another ambulance in service. So it just upgrades the base level of capabilities in its simplest terms. The operational riding members are members that are equal to the base level firefighters of our career folks. So every firefighter in Anne Arundel County is also an EMTB, which is an EMT basic. They have the opportunity to upgrade to a paramedic, but everybody is a firefighter and an EMT. The administrative volunteers do not run any calls. They don't have an operational component. These are the volunteers that help fundraise for the individual companies. They offer office support and staff support. But those would kind of be your three categories if we're talking about the variety we have here, because it can get a little confusing. So about 950 administrative, which do not run calls. Approximately close to 400, the writing database can change and fluctuate, of our writing operational volunteers that offer that additional upstaffing capability. And then almost 1,000 career firefighters that staff all 31 fire stations. So not all 31 fire stations have volunteers in them. There's just a component of about 11 that have active volunteers writing within those stations. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of an overview, if that helps maybe set the tone for the conversation. In regards to the reciprocity agreements, we do work with those two agreements. The way that the agreements, again, because these were developed years and years and years ago, and they do need some modernization, but the way the agreements are understood is that based on the charter, the reciprocity agreements are used for funding, and then also so that the fire chief does not control corporate matters. Corporate affairs, corporate matters is not defined anywhere specifically. I understand that is the fundraising capabilities, the business of that private corporation. That is for their board, their president to run. My job is to make sure that the county citizens, visitors are all afforded the same level of public safety, whether that's EMS, fire, or rescue. Therefore, full operational control resides under me as the fire chief to make sure that whether a volunteer or a career member is the person coming to your door when you call 911, that your level of service is continual and without a blip, to make sure that we're providing equal service to all of our residents and visitors in Anne Arundel County. So I understand the reciprocity agreements as operational control resides with me as the fire chief, and private corporate matters reside with each of those boards or presidents of volunteer corporations.
Thank you so much, Chief Wolford, and that's a really, really good explanation. Just a quick question of clarification. So when you say 950 administrative volunteers, when you say someone that is a volunteer, are these people that are formally registered, or is there some sort of something that would just set them apart from saying, hey, I want to have a fundraiser and buy hamburgers for all the firefighters? Can you provide a little clarity on how that's defined?
Yeah, so within each of the volunteer companies, they have a process as to which they bring in members. So you can be brought in under whatever terms, again, that's considered part of the corporate matters. Where that starts to blend with county government and county leadership is we all fall underneath the umbrella of the county fire department. And whether that's in terms of reputation and what ends up on the front page of the newspaper, the general public doesn't separate the difference between an operational, administrative, a career, a union. So some of that image and likeness, all of that falls under county government. And then some of the just general, if you will, decorum of how folks handle themselves, whether they're following the rules and regulations, things along those lines. The writing members on their level of certification is equal to that of what the career members are. Again, that's that same similar standard of training and certification. But the administrative members are brought in under whatever terms of that private corporation, from my understanding.
But they would have a limited impact, the limited ability to impact actual operations. It's more from a keeping the corporate matters.
Correct. Yes, where their greatest impact is their ability to fundraise and then support the riding members in whatever terms that is, by providing classes or helping in a support kind of backstage role, if you will.
Are there any other commissioners that have any questions or comments on this topic? Commissioner Kaufman.
Yes, so I'm sure you're aware that the three items that we've been tasked to consider as it intersects with the fire department is examining the powers for you to oversee and regulate riding members, evaluate section 547 of the charter as it applies to volunteer fire companies and any entities under which they operate, and then evaluate authorizing the local fire tax for funding the fire department. Is it your understanding that if we were to, on our list, that's number 10. So the first one is examine your powers as it relates to regulating. If we were to put forth a charter revision recommendation that you have that sole authority or responsibility, would it even be necessary for us to, and maybe this is also for Ms. Blair Klasmeyer, would it even be necessary for us to have a secondary explanation or the section 547? Would there be even necessary clarification with regards to that if we're already making a recommendation to afford the fire chief the right to oversee and regulate riding members? Does that make sense?
I mean, I think as the chief said, the fire department is both the career service and the volunteer service when it comes to fire suppression. So when they are mentioned in sections, when the fire department is mentioned in 545, which is the fire chief's duties, it basically says that the fire department shall be administered by the fire chief. And then 547, where it says that the fire department is responsible for administration of the affairs of the county and fire suppression, fire prevention, fire training, fire communications, emergency medical services, and any other duty assigned by the county executive. There is specifically a line that says nothing herein shall permit the fire chief to participate in the corporate affairs of any volunteer fire company. I'm struggling because I think that's an accurate description of the way things work now with the combined fire service. And if somebody thinks that's not accurate, I'd be happy to listen. But and I think that the line in there about not being able to participate in corporate affairs of the volunteer fire company kind of acknowledges that when you talk about the fire department, you're talking about both.
So I suppose the question I'm asking is specifically what if how it reads now reflects what we're doing. What is it that we are seeking to change, amend, consider, revise? Like, I just don't, and I apologize for not having a more in-depth understanding of our operations of the fire program as it relates to the charter. It just seems like if what we're doing now is how it's reflected, what's the ask? That's what I'm unclear on.
And that's where I'm struggling a bit too. But
well, I have a question, but I'll turn it over to Commissioner Telford first, and then have him.
Quick question for the fire chief, Larry Telford. Chief Walford, do the volunteers have any opinions on what we refer to as questions 10 and 11? Do they even know we're talking about this? Is there sort of leadership within the volunteers who possibly could come forward and express their views about this? Or are we back to what Commissioner Kaufman was talking about, which is what are we even really asking of our commission?
So it's my understanding that there could be, again, when they're individual companies, it would be seen as individual businesses. So each of those individual volunteer companies that is treated as a private corporation may have individual opinions. So then you are looking at a multitude of opinions there is a volunteer association board that does oversee the volunteer side. The best way and the comparison to look at that is for the career firefighters, they have a union. So the union president and then the board president for the volunteer association. Those are my points of contact. And so Miss Kitty Gross is the president of the board, and her and I are in regular communication. But I would say, based on the interest of individual private corporations, those interests may not always align with the board. So you're looking at multiple interests and or multiple opinions. And I couldn't possibly express all of those. I don't know how each private corporation feels about that governing body of what they consider their business element.
We'll follow up to that for Mr. Barron. Mr. Barron, when the volunteers come to the county executive, assuming that ever happens, and they have questions, concerns about that, how does that happen? Since it doesn't sound like they have, a union like obviously the union does with a union rep.
So the folks have met with the county executive a couple of times. It's just like we would we meet with the non-represented county employees. So the leaders come and they meet with the county exec. I'm not sure it's much different other than the bargaining that goes on with the union.
So when you say the leaders, are these just leaders of individual fire stations, or are these leaders representing all the volunteers, so to speak?
So I know he's met with, in both capacities, the leaders of one particular or a coalition of them have come together.
Okay.
Mr. Telford, there is a volunteer chief for the private corporation, and then there is a volunteer president, because there is also a board. So it could have been one of two, but again, we're talking about a dozen different companies. And then that volunteer association board, which that's a membership board. So those individual volunteer companies can choose to be a member of the volunteer association.
Okay, I think if we ever answer Mr. Kaufman's question about what are we actually asking for, I'd like this commission to consider possibly bringing forward some type of volunteer representation, possibly at the next meeting, just to see if we can get their take on whatever we decide we're actually trying to do here. And I'll be quiet now.
I think that's that's a fair point. And I suppose, as I understand it, the charter as it's currently written pretty much grants exclusive control for writing members to basically oversee all elements of, firefighting. And that seems to be a prudent measure when it comes to providing a level of service, as it relates to the county. And maybe a clarifying question for Chief Wolford: if there ever is a conflict where there is a difference of opinion, could you provide maybe a theoretical example of where a volunteer entity might have a difference of opinion with perhaps you or your team's vision for how that could work operationally? Or have there been past examples of maybe some differences of opinion? Because everything that I'm seeing, it looks like from an administrative standpoint, you're not involved at all, right? When it comes to the firehouses and the corporations and the other side of the house, but the firefighting side of it, can you think of any examples in the past in which there has been some discussion or compromise between volunteers and writing career firefighters?
Yes, Mr. Snow, I think that's a great question. And I think really the point that all this conversation will come to, whether it's tonight or another night, is probably what is considered a corporate matter and what is not considered a corporate matter. I think, Mr. Kaufman, that's probably where the line is, and where the opinions differ on who should have control, if you will, or power, as the word is used in the statement. And so, Mr. Snow, to your question, there are examples of maybe a standard of training where right now career folks come in and they're trained to the level of a firefighter 2 and an EMTB. And in the past, the volunteer folks have said, we don't need to be at that level. We want to train to a different level. So whether that's a firefighter 1 versus a firefighter 2, or a first responder instead of an EMTB. So that would be an example of, is that a corporate matter because it's about an administrative task that must be achieved? Or is that an operational matter because the outcome is something that the citizens in the community would feel the impact? So I could rule one way. If you're familiar with any type of code and any type of setting, it's the way you interpret wording. So I think that is something that could easily be interpreted to say, well, as a volunteer corporation, we feel you're overstepping and telling us to do something administratively. Or they could say, well, we actually feel this is a great idea. We should all be trained to the same level of service. That's an operational matter. And that is for you, fire chief, to take care of, which means I have to take care of all aspects of it. So that would just be one example. There have definitely been numerous examples in the past of where that line is in terms of private corporate matter or operational and the normal umbrella of which the fire chief works through issues within the department.
And as it's currently defined, you more or less have the power to say whether or not a volunteer firefighter can get on a fire engine or not. Is that correct?
Based on a training and or a discipline standard, yes.
So you basically set the standards, and then if the standards aren't met by those within the volunteer ranks, then they don't get on the fire engine.
That would be by any rank. Part of what I swore to when I raised my hand was that, 1, we would treat all of our firefighters equal, and 2, the community would make sure to get an equal quality of provider, no matter who left the door of the fire station. So that could be a change of practice based on prior fire chiefs, but there was not what I felt equality of treatment of the standards of which we were holding all members of the fire department, a combination fire department.
Thank you. Commissioner Kaufman?
Yeah. Who holds the fiduciary responsibility for providing the training? So if I'm a career fireman, firefighter, excuse me, is that something that is part of my compensation, part of my expectation for compensation? And if I'm a volunteer firefighter for the county, is it the revenue generated by the fire company itself is what is? Again, I'm trying to anticipate what is the likely pushback for what seems to be on a first blush conversation here, a lot of common sense in terms of liability and in terms of delivery of service. So I'm not pushing back on that at all. I'm just trying to understand why this is a charter commission amendment that requires the county council put forth a pretty easy veterans commission proposal for the county charter that they just passed on their own without our involvement. That was an easy one without any effort whatsoever. So they went ahead and just moved it forward themselves. This is one that is requiring a little different layer of evaluation. And I just want to make sure that we're pursuing why it's potentially sticky, or maybe it's just not at all. And I'm just being over analytical.
No, I think you're correct. It's potentially sticky. Otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it, right? If we're having an honest conversation, it is sticky. The roots of the Anne Arundel County Fire Department are volunteer roots. And to me, that is one of the great things about having a combination fire service. So when career folks came into the fire service, it was one by one and little by little. And as we try to balance how to maintain that combination fire department, it gets very difficult. Volunteer firefighters work their Monday through Friday job, or they work their evening job, and they take their own personal time, which is highly commendable, to train and reach that level of standard and not be paid for it. What we are finding is that the recruitment and retention of volunteers is incredibly difficult. because nobody has time and everybody has to work more and everybody needs more money. So it's become very challenging. I also think we change leaderships quite often in the fire service. Have been multiple different fire chiefs in the last 15 years. And there are times that the agenda can seem maybe not on point or in line with the existence of a combination fire department. Sometimes it's hard to shake those old feelings, and trust can be hard to gather. I have been very clear in my commitment to continuing a combination fire department as long as, one, first and foremost, our responsibility is what the community needs, and then two, internally, what the department needs. And that is why I spoke so strongly about the fact of everybody will be treated equally and the same, because at the end of the day, the community doesn't care. They care that we're trained and that we're ready to go, and that's the important piece. So when it comes to training, the state of Maryland, we're incredibly lucky. A lot of our training and the majority of our training does come out of our training academy in Millersville. It runs almost 12 to 13 hours straight every day, but we also have an incredible partnership with the University of Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute, which has an executive director who was the fire chief here previously and is currently a volunteer at Woodland Beach. And when you are signed up and associated with a fire department, you are allowed to go there for free training. But that is in conjunction with being a member of a department such as Anne Arundel County. So we do contribute an immense amount of tax dollars to making sure that everybody is highly trained. But we also know that volunteer companies spend their own money sometimes to put on special classes. So it wouldn't be fair to me to say it's all or no one. It's definitely a combination again.
Yep. No. And I, to be fair and full disclosure, my father-in-law is a MIFRE instructor, and
Okay, good.
And I've been around both volunteer and career firefighters most of my life. So I just, through the course of this conversation, I just want to make sure that we're not like, it doesn't do us any good to not understand what the complication is, because that's really the thing that we need to fix and address and determine what we want to make better or improve, because otherwise we're just dancing around a subject. And I just want to make sure that we're tackling with the amount of respect that both entities require. But I think we have to be able to communicate to our volunteer stakeholders at all levels that liability increases over time. It doesn't decrease over time. And so the implications on having the chief be responsible for sending and deploying firefighting personnel, EMS trained personnel, and potentially having them not be at the same standard or level of training is only going to increase in complications over time. It's not going to decrease. So anyway,
Commissioner Fleckenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Snow. Tom Fleckenstein. I think first and foremost, I want to say that I agree with Mr. Telford that I think before we make any decision, we should get some perspective from someone who can represent in some capacity the perspective of the volunteer. But that said, I'm still struggling a little bit to understand what the actual problem is. And I want to make sure I understood the chief correctly, because I thought I heard two different things. Are there instances, Chief, where you are having a conflict with volunteer entities about the level of training, for instance, of persons who are going to be able to, be a riding member, respond to a fire, that type of thing, where you're going to have different levels of training there? And is that something that you're not prevented from, that you are prevented from preventing now?
I'm just trying to get the
double
yes,
negative, right?
Yes. So no,
maybe I can ask it this way, and I can make it clear. Let's say that I live out in Pasadena. Let's say there's a call out here, and you've got some career firefighters responding to a call from, say, Lakeshore Volunteer Fire Department, and the volunteers have some members there as well responding. Are you telling me that not necessarily specific to Lakeshore, but are there situations where there could be different levels of training for the personnel that might be responding to a fire in that instance? And if that's the case, are you telling us that, or do I understand that you're not allowed to tell Lake Shore you can't put XYZ person on that call because they don't have the same level of training as the career firefighters that are responding?
I would say this is my third year here as fire chief. And when I got here, my job is to uphold the rules and regulations. And we did just that. We also had to modernize some of the policies were 20 and 30 years old. And so we've committed a lot of time and resources to that. So I will say I am fully capable of doing that. And that is what we have been doing to make sure to get everybody up to the standard that the community expects. But that has not been easy or without resistance.
Okay, and why is there resistance? Is there a belief in some volunteer agencies that they can set their standards of training, for instance? Again, I'm trying to understand the problem.
I would hate to be the one to put words in their mouth. I think Mr. Telford is still spot on that somebody should be able to speak to both sides of that. I continue to go back to, again, when I got here and when I spoke with all the companies of the number one goal is that our job is to provide the service that the community needs, not that we want, not that we think we want, not what we think we should be doing, but the actual expectation of the community. And having that as the sole focus, I believe has been difficult for some folks.
Okay, so I guess then maybe I clarified even more for me. In the time that you've been here, have you not been able to achieve that?
We are very close, but it has taken all this time to achieve that. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, I appreciate it, Chief. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Hangleiter.
Thank you, Ashley Hangleiter. Chief, thank you very much for coming and sitting with us this evening. I do have a question as we're trying to weigh these options in regards to the size of the volunteer community. I know that you said there's 400 writing members and 950 admin. It seems like most of the concern is a little bit more towards the training side. But out of those 450, can you give us a proportion of, okay, I doubt that the 450 work 8 24-hour shifts like a paid firefighter does. You know, how many are actually active? You said something about 11 stations. The volunteer group says that there's 26. How active actually are these groups?
Well, so it has a great variation of the ones that have the operational members. There are numerous of them. I'm just recounting 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So 16 that have an option to have the writing volunteer members. So let's say you look at a station like Cape Sinclair, they might decide that every night they have somebody in there either writing the ambulance or writing the engine, but you might have maybe a company that's a little bit slower. The bottom line is the volunteer company itself and the volunteer writing members, I don't have the ability to say when they are scheduled. So that is something that is felt to have fallen within corporate matters. So that's why I say all 31 fire stations are fully staffed by career firefighters. One, I have to make sure that the coverage is there for the community. And then when the volunteers decide they want to ride, I can't determine that schedule. I can't say you have to come in for 4 hours on Tuesday and 24 hours on Saturday. When a volunteer comes in, they report to the career officer and say, I'm here, I'll be here for 5 hours. And then they're within kind of that blanket of oversight by the career officer. So that would be a great example if we were previously talking about, I can't interfere with corporate matters. I don't have the right to do that because I can't schedule them. Therefore, I don't have a dependent workforce. Some companies are much stronger than others, and we know they will show up every day or every night, but other companies are not as strong. And we see that changing and fluctuating a lot based on just things going on in life in the world.
I appreciate that information. And what I know that because due to the reciprocity agreements, one, I didn't realize that any of the volunteer companies still owned the fire stations. How many of those are there?
9. There are 9 that are volunteer-owned buildings. And then we have somewhat of a, if you will, a lease agreement with them.
Okay. And what, from the reciprocity agreements, what proportion of the fire budget is dedicated to the volunteer agreements and to running them and keeping them going?
So there's going to be 2 sides to that. There's going to be the operational side, which in past history, when we looked at how that was divided by companies, we can go back almost 30 years to the previous chiefs, and they say at the time, well, it was just divided by who had more control on which board. So there's a little bit of a legacy piece that comes with that. The main component of where the county budget comes into play is 2 things with the buildings and the maintenance. And so we have a budgeted line item that say there is a leak in a volunteer-owned building. We know our duty is to make sure to take care of those career and volunteer firefighters. So the volunteer company would fix the leak, they would submit it, and we would pay for all of it or a portion of that, depending on the cost. We work that out. And then the other piece is the maintenance of all apparatus. So that's anything from tankers, fire engines, SUVs, brush trucks. So we take care of vehicle maintenance, and then we also take care of fuel. And then along with the buildings, depending on whether it's county or volunteer owned, mainly in this instance, the volunteer owned, a piece of just regular household items, electric, sewer, trash, that type of thing. So it's all very interwoven of multiple levels depending on who owns the building and which type of agreement. But those would be the base items that get shared, if you will.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that information.
Thank you.
Chief Wolford, is there anything in the charter as you work to execute your duties as the fire chief that you feel prohibits or limits your ability to provide the service you've been asked to provide to the county?
I would say, based on some of how the reciprocity agreements are worded, the wording is outdated. You all were given a copy of the charter agreements, and if you look through on the first page, the agreements are based on a study done in 1995. That's almost 30 years ago, and the department has grown considerably in a lot of aspects. And so I would say there are portions of the agreement that do hinder the capabilities of the fire service, and whether that's, you know, how we train, how we serve, how we staff, but it's based on an outdated study. So based on that, yes, I would say there are limitations.
Just to clarify, you're referring to the actual chart, the language in the charter itself related to how you relate to the volunteers?
No, the reciprocity agreement that was built off of the charter. Yes. The wording itself of the charter, to me, there is clarity in there, but there is nowhere that defines what the corporate affairs or corporate matters are. So that for me would be the lack of clarity piece. And I think it goes back to Mr. Kaufman's question. Why are we here? What is that line in the simplest form?
Okay, Ms. Klausmeier, to that point, and I think that my next recommendation is going to be that we, you know, put a pin in this discussion, hear from the other side, and then come back to it. But to that point, do you see an opportunity to make a recommendation to addressing, or at least clarifying, what the relationship would look like and what would be the level of effort? How, you know, what kind of hornet's nest are we kicking if we go down that road?
I can see an opportunity to at least define corporate affairs. I mean, I think that the chief has mentioned that that's an issue. It's been an issue. I've seen it be an issue over my 20 years. I haven't been intimately involved like the various chiefs, but I have seen that issue come up over the years. So I think I think the chief is right. The rest of it's pretty clear. You know, here's what the fire department does, and here's what the chief is involved in. But that one sentence with that one phrase, I think, could use better definition, expansion. so we can figure out what that means.
And
Means.
Would it be our responsibility to provide that definition, or could our recommendation be a matter of there's a lot of questions here, we want the council to like what do you recommend that we approach that? Because I can't even begin to even think about defining where that line ought to be, but what would that look like from a recommendation standpoint?
I think with the chief's help, and maybe when the volunteers come in, we could come up with some language that would attempt to better define that. These I think as the chief has explained, these companies have kind of a double side. They have their business side, they have their administrative side. Many of them have halls, so there's that whole, social. They provide social locations and activities, and then they have the firefighting side. So I think that you could do either way. You could have language that attempts to do it, or at least explain what you're trying to define, or what needs to be defined and in what way. And you could take, suggestions from the administration or from the volunteers and see which one you like, or if there's some way to mash them together and come up with some language.
Okay.
And you could at least define the issue from both perspectives. And, if you didn't feel like you wanted to do language, you could define the issue from both perspectives, at least.
Okay. Well, we're at 8:00 right now. And so we do have another matter that I think that we should discuss. And the main thing I'm thinking right now is that I really would like to hear from the volunteers on this. So can I get some sentiment from the commission on maybe tabling this discussion, reaching out and trying to get a representative from the volunteers, and then perhaps moving along those lines about how we might improve the language? Is everyone okay with that, or do we want to discuss this a little more?
So moved.
All right, sounds good. General consensus. We will move on to the fun part, fire tax. So I can tell you that, we know what the intent from the charter was. Thanks, Ms. Klausmeier, for clarifying, what the original mindset was, is that we really don't want to go down, the framers didn't want to go down the road of allocating specific taxes for specific purposes. However, I would be interested to hear from Chief Wolford, what are your sentiments on the idea of a dedicated fire tax? And maybe Mr. Barron can weigh in on this as well. How might that impact operations, and what are you guys' general thoughts on implementing a fire tax here in Anne Arundel County? We'll start with you, Chief Wolford.
From the information that's been shared with me on the fire tax, I would certainly need to understand the longevity of it. I don't feel like I have a lot of clarity to give you a very clear, specific answer. I am always in favor of looking into anything that obviously could benefit the community or how we serve the community, but I don't yet have enough information. So I would be interested in reviewing more information and working with the group, or if Mr. Barron had any comment to go with that.
Thanks, Chief. We have not pursued any kind of fire tax in the Pittman administration. We don't have any plans to do so in the immediate term. Ms. Blair Klausmeier might be able to speak a little bit about impact fees. There is public safety impact fees when it comes to development that act similar to this, although it's different. So we have not pursued it, is the short answer.
And is it safe to say you haven't pursued it because you don't see a great need for it?
We have increased our fire budget significantly over the past couple of years with the other forms of revenue the county gets. So we haven't seen a need for it. Always open to conversations, but no, we have not pursued it.
Ms. Klausmeier, any thoughts that you want to add before I move on to the commissioners?
No, as I mentioned before, I think that this is something, there was a road tax, there was a fire tax, there were all these various taxes that then got divvied up. I referred you to, there was gasoline tax, there was some tobacco tax money that came in. And these various taxes got kind of divvied up in ways that didn't make a lot of sense. And so the notion is, there's the sources of funds, the revenues are identified, all the money goes into a pot, and then it's all budgeted back out again. And we're going to talk about that in Article 7 of the charter as well. And I think that this was something, again, that the framers really saw as a problem that needed to be solved, and they solved it in the way they did, which was kind of a centralized system rather than divvying up amongst taxes. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, I have to go back and look. I think they specifically said there can't be a road tax. So that's something that it just shows the strength of their feelings about these things. The impact fees, Mr. Barron was mentioning, is that when there's a new development, there are impact fees that are intended to offset the increased costs of public safety, roads, and schools. And there are formulas for that. There are studies that need to be done to determine proportionality of those fees. So for new development, we have that and can be used for funding those needs in communities where there are new development. So.
Is it safe to say that this could theoretically backfire, where you set up a fire tax and then something happens and then you don't have enough revenue to go around, or that could potentially be a leveraging stick in budget discussions?
Right. And then you have a lot of money over here because you've got a fire tax, but you don't have enough money to, for other departments or other projects. You don't have enough money for parks because you've got this budget, you've got this bunch of money over here for fire that you can't use for your parks, things like that. So, the budget process is a balancing act, essentially. So,
yeah, let's hear from Commissioner Kaufman.
So in the absence of any rationale that's been provided, we have, if you ask the general public, now's probably not a great time to add taxes. I mean, I'm just going to go out on a limb here. If the current administration, who is, and again, I'm going to speak in hyperbole and being absurd for the sake of proving the point, if the current administration, who, if you ask his opponents, will tax and charge for anything, isn't even asking for a tax for the fire department here to be singled out. And historically speaking, we're not looking for on the other side of the aisle for any additional taxes to be added to the list of ways we can charge the general population for doing business. I would just love to table this, to be very candid. The chief hasn't proposed a reason why she's seeking it, and I respect that. It's not something that we're not struggling. When I say struggling, I don't mean we couldn't use more resources, but at the end of the day, we're in a place where the addition of a fire tax isn't going to change the operational capacity. If anything, I think it would potentially diminish it, because there would be folks who would say that the amount of money that's set aside in the fire tax is going to be a cap, or is going to be a limit, or like I would just rather see the county government be able to ebb and flow as priorities change and are needed. And I'm not hearing from a staff standpoint, nor am I hearing from a elected executive standpoint a rationale why we should consider moving a tax forward. And it just seems not timely and not necessarily anything that this group of non-elected volunteer commissioners should be moving forward. But that would be my opinion.
Commissioner Fleckenstein.
Thank you, Tom Fleckenstein. I think I tend to agree with Mr. Kaufman. I guess I'm curious once again, and where did this come from then? Why is this something that, does anyone have any knowledge as to why this was something the council put into our resolution to consider?
I don't have any knowledge necessarily, but I can think of a rationale. I think that generally, whenever there are budget battles, there is a concern that, as has been alluded to, priorities may change. And so I would imagine that, there might be people, interested in saying, whatever priorities change, we do want to make sure that this position, this department has a stronger footing, as it relates to how resources are allocated and distributed, and you're able to provide some needs. And so I think that that would be I could see that as a rational counterpoint to say this is simply making sure that, fire safety will always be a priority. They will always have its own protected category. And politically, I could see a lot of advantages to saying, hey, I raised taxes, but it was for the fire department. So, I'm, not supporting some other, agenda or whatever. So I could see the rationale. I tend to agree that if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing. But I would see this being an issue if the fire department was underfunded, or they were constantly having challenges getting funding, or had to constantly fight for every nickel and dime. But I don't get the sense that's happening. Now, I will ask this, maybe to Chief Wolford, in your experience, do the political proclivities of the executive in charge have an impact on your ability to provide services?
They would have the ability to highly impact funding. I will say, for the 3 years I have been here, our funding has continued to increase, and highly supportive of the fire department.
But it
does have an impact with the change of leadership.
I was about to say, if you had someone that didn't have as much of a priority, would you see a fire tax as a buffer to kind of protect your interest in that position?
Well, it wouldn't only be the leadership, it would also be council members. So that also has the opportunity to have a negative or positive effect. And then ultimately, how that tax money and where it is used, and that not being articulated in some of my past experience, that tends to be the greatest hindrance. So it's not about the amount and how often or where it comes from. It's where and how much is allowed to be used in which areas. And that is where we would revert right back to our beginning conversation of which priorities and who is allowed to say what is the priority.
Commissioner Fleckenstein?
I'm sorry, I had my hand has just stayed raised. I guess the only thing I would add in light of that, and I think your explanation as to a potential rationale for it, Mr. Snow, certainly makes perfect sense. But it just seems like there's nobody at any level that would be interested in seeing us authorize a fire tax that really has raised that, presented that. I'm not hearing any support for it. I mean, I don't know that in light of that, if it's even something we need to put a lot more time in, considering that we've got so little time to address other issues.
Maybe I could ask you this, Mr. Fleckenstein. I guess I'm thinking about what Chief Wolford has said, and she said that, the funding has gone up and up and up. That tells me that it hasn't always been where it is now.
Sure.
And so, again, there's clearly a political link here, right? There's clearly priorities being shifted. And so, do you potentially see value in a stabilizing factor with a fire tax? Could that potentially make it so that there's not such a massive fluctuation? Because I know that, things haven't changed, financially for the county a great deal. Obviously we've had some, but to be able to have that kind of flexibility, it feels like we might be better served to have more of a stabilizing effect, through different administrations. So there's not as much political wrangling over the funding.
I guess I can understand your point there, but again, where is the problem, and then where is the end of this, right? Budgetary issues are always fluctuating, right? What's important from one year to the next, to one council, to one executive, those are always going to be, potentially subject to all sorts of considerations. And if we don't have a police tax, and we don't have a transportation tax and a road tax, I guess for me, I would want to know specifically why we would then want to have a fire tax if it's not something that the administration sees a big problem with, the fire department does. Again, if somebody has some understanding of a reason as to why this is important, then I'm all ears, but I'm just not hearing it. So I'm struggling to understand why it's even been presented to us this way.
Commissioner Kaufman.
Yeah, I think that maybe even a more significant slippery slope we really don't want to be entering is the promotion of single issue taxes that we're having the charter be committed to for a 10-year cycle. Look, we've got elections, and whether we like them or not, or agree that they're truly vetting, activities. At the end of the day, we do have a process that allows us to be dissatisfied with an administration that underfunds, whether it be public safety, whether it be, any other aspect of, education. I mean, we see that's a driver to people to get to the polls. And so I would hate to see us put in the charter a structure that identifies a single priority that it's not a matter of whether or not any of us or all of us value that function of our lives. It's a matter of whether or not the county's charter should be a document that for the next 10 years mandates that a fire tax that isn't currently being called for by a groundswell of request should be the tone setter for us to have other single issue priorities, because we know that there are other things that are very, very important to segments of our population. And then I just think that that's a slippery slope that we don't want to get down personally.
I agree. Well, I think what I'm hearing is that there's not a huge appetite to make any recommendations in this area. Any other comments from anyone else? I suppose, I might, make a motion to say that we have just take a stance and say we don't really want to deal with this right now. So recommend no changes related to this, Commissioner Telford.
We just vote yes or no on this and then end it.
Sounds good to me. So I'll move that we make no recommendation on a fire tax at this time.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Check that one off the agenda. That's unanimous, right? I think. All right. So there will be no recommendations related to a fire tax moving forward. So I think the next steps, we would definitely like to hear from a representative from the volunteers at our next meeting, and then we can add this to the agenda, and then with the goal of coming up with potential clarifying language in the charter to better define the relationship between operational members and volunteer members. I feel like that's kind of where we're headed. Commissioner Kaufman?
Specifically, I think we need to define, I think really the issue is we need to define that which is, and I'm drawing a blank now, Chief, I'm sorry, corporate matters and operational, like that to me is really the thing, because right now, I don't think there's a dispute that you oversee operational matters. The issue is that there's lack of clarity as to what serves distinctly as an operational matter or what is a corporate matter that has a direct impact on operational matters. And that's where I'll use a very dated term, the sticky wicket. I feel very old when I use that term. So I just want to thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, Chief Wolford, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for providing a really good explanation of everything that we've done, and hopefully it was worth your time this evening. Ms. Klausmeier, do you mind giving us your excellent introduction of the next very non-controversial issue related to the county budget?
Because none of them are, right? So I don't know, but Laura, were you planning on doing kind of a walkthrough of Article 7?
I'm ready if Mr. Snow and the rest of the commissioners, if you would like, I can bring up the resolution. I can also bring up the portions of the charter that you're going to be discussing, if that would help you.
Because I think it's numbers 6, 7.
Would you like to see the resolution? Is that what you want to see?
Yes. Do you mind? Yeah. Just.
Oh, no, not a problem. I just want to make sure I bring up the right thing here.
Should be 6, 7, 8, 9, and 12.
So I've begun crossing out things that you have sort of discussed or ruled out. So yeah, so here we have 6, 7, 8, 9. and then we'll jump to 12. Mrs. Glassmeyer, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are on the screen. If you want to review those real quick, and I'll pop to the next page in a moment.
Sure. So number 6 is evaluate allowing the county council to increase or amend items in the budget. And I think we have kind of had some high level discussions on this in the past too. So maybe the best way to do this is kind of do a little bit of an overview of how the whole budget thing works. So the county executive formulates and brings forward the budget to the county council. The budget includes a revenue estimates and then budgetary items for appropriation for each department in various categories, including personnel, materials, contractual services, grants, that sort of thing. The county executive's budget also includes the budget for the Board of Education. There is a very incredibly complex, probably only understood by 3 people in the world, formula of how you calculate the maintenance of effort for the Board of Education, which the county is required to fund. And then we fund basically major categories for the Board of Education. So the budget is brought forward. The county council studies that budget. And under the charter, what they're allowed to do is, for the county's budget, decrease items that are presented by the county executive, but they're not allowed to increase any items. So even if they would take money away from one category or one department, they cannot increase another category or another department. The exception to that is with respect to the Board of Education. If the county executive has decreased any items in the budget presented to the county executive by the Board of Education, the county council can restore those cuts. So they could increase the Board of Education budget that's presented by the county executive, and that is required under state law. So this particular item, the notion here is that the county council could not only decrease certain items in the budget, but they could also increase items in the budget. And I will say that kind of the way this works is the county council will go through and make cuts. And then the county executive usually will come back with a supplemental budget that will then kind of work on taking those funds and maybe increasing some other categories, decreasing some categories, and presenting it in the form of amendments to the budget, to the actual budget that then in the end gets passed. So this would allow the county council to increase and not just decrease. So once there is a budget ordinance, the annual budget and appropriation ordinance, or ABAO as we affectionately refer to it, it includes both the operating budget and the capital budget. Then there is an ordinance for the taxes to support that budget. So the revenue sources have been identified by the budget office, and not everything obviously is paid for with taxes. There are grant funds, there are state funds, there are both state and federal grant funds, there are state funds through certain programs. So not everything is tax generated, but, and there are income tax revenues, I believe. And I think Ms. McQuaid is joining us, and she will correct me if I'm wrong on this at some point, but I believe the county gets, for example, a share of the transfer taxes. So there are all these different things that are put in the pot as far as revenues, and then the revenues that are needed to continue to support the budget. There is a tax levy on the real property tax levy. And the requirement under the charter is that the budget be balanced. The other kind of wrinkle in this is that the county has something that is many times referred to as a tax cap, but what it truly is a tax revenue cap. So under, and I just had this section right in front of me because I was looking at it again. But basically what it says is that, that the revenues derived from property taxes on properties existing on the property tax rolls at the commencement of the county fiscal year shall not increase compared with the previous year more than the CPI change or by 4.5%, whichever is less. So again, it's the revenues from the taxes that it can't increase by more than the CPI or 4%, whichever is less. And you're looking specifically at the properties that are on the tax rolls at the beginning of the fiscal year. Yes, I'm sorry, it's 710D. I know, yeah, Ms. Corby is, scrolling through. So that kind of plays into the whole balancing the budget at the end of the process. So as far as that, and this is something we'll get into in one of these other numbers, as far as the capital budget is funded through both general fund monies, but also through bond funds and grant funds and the impact fees that we talked about earlier and other various funding sources. And so ultimately there is a bond ordinance to support the bond funding in the capital budget. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but I did see that the county is to be congratulated for getting a AAA bond rating. That word just came out today. They went from an AA1 to a AAA with one of the rating. And I think it was Moody's, but I don't want to get it wrong. And Ms. McQuaid, I'm sure, will correct me if I got that. So in any event, that's kind of a broad overview. I do note, and I think I've mentioned this in one of our other meetings, that the state budget worked very similarly to the county's budget. In other words, the General Assembly could cut the governor's proposed budget, but could not increase it. However, there was recently an amendment that allows the General Assembly to increase certain items to a certain extent. And I believe this is going to be the first fiscal year where that can happen. I believe that the legislation was passed.
Not until next fiscal year.
Fiscal year.
It's not this current budget, it's the next one.
But it was passed a couple years ago. I mean, they're working up to it, I think.
It was a constitutional amendment that voters approved in the 2020 election.
Right. So they're working up to it. So it'll be the next fiscal year. And the other counties, I will say, and I think I have something somewhere that I can provide to you. There are several other counties that do allow the budgets to be increased through the budget process by the legislative bodies. So
that's a pretty great breakdown. Thank you so much for walking us through that. I will toss it over to Commissioner Waddy.
I just want to say I appreciate the explanation, and as I said, I'm had to head out early tonight, so thank you so much, and it was great seeing you all again. And I look forward to watching the replay. Thank you.
We'll make sure it's as important as possible.
No.
All right. So I guess we'll just take each of them one by one. So number 9, evaluating whether or not council members, I don't see everyone jumping up to say anything. I mean, from my perspective, I kind of like the way that it's set up right now. I think that if I understand correctly, Ms. Klausmeier, the framers really liked the strong executive role for the county. To me, it feels like it's been a pretty solid balance, and when it comes to priorities and how we deal with those things. And so I'm not really inclined to disrupt that. I will ask this, Ms. Klausmeier, are there other jurisdictions that follow this model, like local jurisdictions where people can add, the council members can add to the budget?
Yeah, they go both ways. There are some that there are a couple, and I will provide more. I know I have it somewhere.
Just like off the top of your head, is it common, especially among counties our size, or is there a tendency in philosophy to kind of leave it with the executive?
Yeah, my recollection, most counties started out the way we did. Many of us that formed charter counties at about the same time have essentially the same language. I can tell you I can find out which one's changed. But I think that it's more common to have in the charter counties, to have the stronger executive budget system. And I think that it's hard to do it differently if you're going to have a revenue cap. Because you can only get so much money. There's only so much revenue available. And so, how those decisions are made and the interplay, I think it would be difficult to allow additions to a budget under those circumstances. And probably the budget and finance people could speak to that, what they're looking at when they're formulating, which they're probably doing now. And so,
in the interest of efficiency, it seems like 9, 10, and 11, even though they're different areas, they all kind of relate to the same dynamic in which, there's a heavy reliance on the county executive to, really guide some of these projects and these resources. Mr. Barron, can we get your thoughts on specifically 9, 10, and 11, which would more or less directly take aim at the flexibility of your administration to provide funding and dealing with some of these issues?
Well, I turned my camera off just because I got the notice that my internet was unstable. You all turned into robots for a second, and I thought it was you, but I think it was me. So if I caught the gist of the question right, the county I think, has put in practice we've done supplemental budgets. We've worked with all council members to bring things forward. What Ms. Blair Klausmeyer said is very correct. The way our revenues are structured in the county, we have to be very careful to live within our means, more so than other jurisdictions that don't have those types of revenue caps. So our position is we're comfortable with the structure as is. I think you can make an argument that if you are going to increase these responsibilities to the county council, you also need to increase the county council's staff. Right now, each council member only has one legislative aide. So you would not only have to open yourself up to growing the budget based on council member additions, you also would need to provide the council additional personnel dollars to do their job effectively.
Thank you. Mr. Telford?
Larry Telford, question for, I guess, county staff. If we were to let the county council increase items in the budget, I'm assuming that means the overall budget would be bigger. And if it's bigger, wouldn't someone have to identify a revenue source to cover that increase, correct?
That's correct. And if they're going to add and
I don't think anybody is.
Oh.
Oh. Sorry, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. My internet's unstable, so I'm interrupting you. I apologize.
No, I think that's correct. I mean, if you add, in other words, if you're not balancing, if you're adding without decreasing somewhere else, yeah, you've got to identify some funding source. And there's this revenue cap that, as far as property taxes, is sitting out there that you can't exceed. So
right. And for my edification, the council can actually increase specific items in the budget as long as there's an offset somewhere else in it, right?
Not at the moment. No.
They literally can't.
They literally
anything.
Can't.
Is that where the supplemental comes in?
The only thing they can increase, as I mentioned, is under the state law. They can increase the Board of Ed to the extent that the Board of Ed's requested budget was cut by the county executive.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Fleckenstein?
Thank you, Tom Fleckenstein. The only thing I think I would add here, in previous employment within the county, I was involved a little bit in not council budget issues, but in the process itself. And it seems to me that the current process, it's not like the council members aren't involved, right? I mean, to an extent, it fosters, and I'm sure the politicians would say that they would take issue with this word, but it kind of fosters a somewhat of a collaborative environment, right? If a council person wants something in their particular district, right, they go to the executive, they say, hey, I need X, Y, and Z for ABC in my district. Can we get it in the budget? Here's why, this, that, and the other thing. So it's not like the council's not involved in helping set the budget. And then, of course, not everybody's always going to get what they want, and not everybody's going to be happy. But if we've got that structure, and then we go through the process, and the executive puts together a budget, and then the council can essentially, ignore that or increase things as they see fit. I think in our current structure, that's just potentially a recipe for disaster and for lengthening the budget process considerably. I think Mr. Barron's point about needing to increase council staff actually is something to consider in light of what I think we would unleash if we were to change the current structure and allow that. So to me, that's a great point that kind of pushes me even further toward thinking that the current structure is really the way to go. Especially because the council and the individual members are not left out of it at all. It's a very, again, they may take issue with the word, but I see it as a collaborative budget process in that sense.
Commissioner Kaufman.
Yeah, listen, I know that we're in a pretty polarized political window of time now, and for the most part, it's typically the assertion of wielding power and the person with the power, the people with the power get to do what they want. But we need to facilitate more reasons to be in the middle than to give reasons to be able to disagree and get your way. At the end of the day, and I think it's a great word, Commissioner Fleckenstein. There is a need to collaborate and agree, because many times the middle ground may not have as much of what I want as and may not have as much of what you want, but it's how we create a compromise that allows us to meet a larger number of people's needs. So establishing compromise, I think, is not a bad thing. I think this is probably an area where we may be able to get more direct staff input as to recent examples of budgetary issues where there has been an area where there's been a disagreement between the council and the county executive, and why this is on our agenda. Again, there's a motivation for it to be here. Something didn't occur, and we're now being put in a situation to consider making it occur in the future. So I don't know if there's a particular subject that in recent memory would allow us to be able to have more clarity on what we're debating or discussing, but that would be helpful for me.
Commissioner Fleckenstein.
Thank you, Tom Fleckenstein. And I think, Mr. Kaufman, you bring up an even better point, right? I mean, the bottom line is, it seems to me in my experience that whether you're a council person or you're an agency head or whatever you happen to be, it seems like it's almost routine in my experience that you don't always, if ever, get what you're asking for, right? Everybody goes to the county executive with a wish list for their department or for their district or whatever it happens to be. The county attorney will go in and say, I need X, Y, Z this year. The representative of the state's attorney's office will go in and say the same thing. And the executive, in all likelihood, is saying no in some capacity to just about everybody's request. And then, to then allow anyone who's unhappy with what the executive done, and I understand an agency head then can't go and do it under this proposal, but then for a councilman who doesn't get what he or she wants in any particular time from an executive to then essentially either hijack or raise revenue in a way that they shouldn't be allowed to do, or increase budgetary spending somewhere else, it strikes me as, again, I'm going to say recipe for disaster, and not a collaborative potential compromising way of putting together a budget when the county is constrained the way it is.
What I'm hearing is that at least on item 9, people are in general agreement. Doesn't seem like there's a huge appetite to change. Do people feel similarly about items 10 and 11 related to bond initiatives and what was the other one? Bond initiatives.
I think it.
We mean 6 and 7, right?
6 and 7.
Oh, sorry.
Right?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. 6 and
Okay.
6. Yeah, sorry. 6 and 7.
And if I could, on the bond initiative one, I did get some more information on this today about exactly what this means, because I struggled to figure out what it meant. There are some, and I actually ended up having to go to our bond counsel and ask him. So the example that was given to me was Prince George's County, and they actually put their bond purchases or their bond authorizations, on the ballot every 2 years. So they actually have a provision. They have a provision in their charter that they take bond authorizations to referendum every 2 years. I don't know how that works in the practical world, because I don't know how. I honestly don't know how it works, because you need the bond authorizations to go forward with the projects and get the funding and that sort of thing. And so it's a very complicated question about how that would even work. The way the bonds authorizations work in Anne Arundel County is that we do have a debt limit. We do have a borrowing limit under the charter. So once the capital budget is proposed and finalized, then there is a bond authorization ordinance prepared by bond counsel. All of the numbers from the capital budget are filled into that bond ordinance, so it can't be done until after the budget is finalized. We make sure all the debt ceilings aren't exceeded, et cetera. He does, the bond counsel does. I admit, I'm at a 30-mile level on all of that. But that bond ordinance is taken forward to the county council, and the county council adopts the bond ordinance, and then that's what's taken forward for the bond sale, and the bonds are sold in accordance with that ordinance. And so I'm not sure, if anybody's interested in somehow letting the voters vote every 2 years on bond authorizations, I can certainly get more information on how that practically works. I can't quite figure out, and it seems to me that it would slow down your capital budget. I can't figure out how it wouldn't, but there are a few counties, apparently, based on what bond counsel told me today, that have it. And I can certainly explore more if anybody's interested, but I just wanted to put that out there, that that's apparently what number 7 is getting to. And
it's not as if the council members are originating bonds and putting it out. They're just basically putting what's already been researched by the county executive's office, and then kind of putting it on the ballot.
And it would be, I assume the way it works is it's in accordance with a capital budget that they are approving. So it's basically the same thing that the council does here, but for some reason they take that bond authorization to the citizens. And my real question is, what happens if they don't approve that, $144 million for roads, or, I don't know what happened. You can't have any road projects. That's kind of where I'm a little stumped on it. And I would have to do a lot more research to figure it out. But I did want to kind of explain what it means, or what I'm being told. The council person that was interested in this intended it to mean. So that's where I was pointed. And I reached out to bond counsel. It would, even interpreting this question would require bond counsel. It would require our municipal finance advisors that we use for our bond sales. They could comment on, not only the finances of it, but whether it affects the bond rating. And we seem to have really good bond ratings, so I'm not sure that we want to mess with that much. But
don't fix it.
I just throw it out there because it was just explained to me over the past, 24 hours or so what this means, and
that makes sense. Thank you.
I'm happy to get it, but so.
Commissioner Kaufman.
Yeah. So one of the aspects of the language here that is concerning, and maybe Ms. Blair-Klaas-Meyer, maybe based on what you're saying, that I'm not reading this correctly. But it also suggests that it would allow, so if currently the initiation of a bond is happening elsewhere and ultimately the county council is just authorizing it to move on to, to its next life or whatever, that's one thing. It sounds to me in this language that it's also suggesting the possibility for the county council to introduce and do an end around of the process to do a supplemental bond that may be a priority for a majority of the council or whatever the case may be, that doesn't align with the county executive or doesn't align with the initiative. So if it's allowing the council to introduce a bond initiative and place that on the ballot, that language suggests to me the disagreement between council and county executive and the ability to circumvent part of the process to get it more directly to like that. That seems like what that language is asking. Maybe it's not, because if the explanation you got was directly from the source, but I would just, because of the nature of how our revenue is handled and managed, and that's a different conversation. I'm really glad they didn't actually ask us to talk about that, because that would have been a completely different can of worms. But I just worry about having multiple individuals being in positions of augmenting spending when the awareness of how it's interconnected and interrelated to revenue. Like, you asked me if I think that education spending is important. I'm an educator. Of course, I'm going to say that I think it's important, and I'm going to vote for it on a bond initiative in a public setting. I may not necessarily be spending the time and energy to care about how that balances the budget and how that impacts all of the other spending, because that's a single issue that's important to me. And whether we like it or not, it's interesting. People tend to be single issue voters a lot of times. So we're not necessarily running a $1.9 billion corporation based on the whims of a group of single issue voters. So I just don't want us to be putting ourselves in a position where we're constantly allowing one-off financial decisions because singularly they're important, and I can totally believe it. I just wish that we were able to be more respectful in our discourse politically, but that's also not a charter revision commission discussion either. So I'll move on.
I'm introducing a charter amendment that says if you are a jerk, you can't be in public office. No, I interpreted the question the same way that you did, Commissioner Kaufman. So that was, I was very averse to anything like that. It did feel like an end around it. And similarly, I know it's a little bit of a different thing with the Councilmanic district community benefits, but Commissioner Fleckenstein, your thoughts?
My thoughts are, the more we talk about this, the more it seems like it's really kind of tied into in a very similar request to number 6. Which I think we've all pretty much kind of decided we don't want to see as a good idea. So it seems to me that these are almost a package, and that the rationale for, if you are not in support, which I don't happen to be based on our conversation, I think, to do one and then the other doesn't make a lot of sense.
I actually had thought that all 3, 6, 7, and 8 were kind of related. Now, related to number 8, I think I feel like, even though the language is different and the context is different, it's still a similar battle. Right now, community, the issues related to community benefit programs are currently administered through the county executive, and their areas are picked out. And this would basically allow council districts to be eligible. Again, I don't know, I just see that as balancing the scales further for the council, and more or less creating more opportunities for council members to go rogue or to really create tension and issues within the running of government. So, I mean, I see all 3 of these as, how do we tip the scales as it relates to financial responsibility and accountability in the government? And I kind of like the way that it is. But there's a couple of thoughts here. Mr. Barron, if you don't mind. Well, so first of all, before we do that, I think let's just go ahead and get some agreement on 6 and 7. I'll make a movement that we have no recommendations for 6 and 7. It seems like that's the consensus. Any seconds on that?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right, so there are 2 abstentions. So yeah, those are off. We're not going to deal with those. Number 8, related to this community benefit program. Mr. Barron, do you mind giving us a little bit of background on this process and the relation between the council and the executive on this?
Happy to. How's my internet, Mr. Chair?
Sounds great. Looks great.
Okay, good. So county execs have done this in a couple of different ways, as I understand it. Our administration has centralized them and built a public process for it so that interested, qualified nonprofits generally, or community organizations, are vetted and submit certain paperwork to make sure they can be acceptable entities and not private operations. We've mirrored some of the policies and procedures that are best practices that, like, the Department of General Services at the state uses when they put out state grants. We look at all the applications that come in, and you wouldn't be surprised. And I think every year more requests have come in, money to fund, and then have to make some decisions. Those decisions do take into account council members. I don't want to say pet projects, but pet projects, right? The council member will call the county exec or call me or call somebody in the administration, say, I really want to see this project funded. Can we make sure it's in the budget? And that does have weight. So other administrations have decentralized the grant process. One of the issues that we noticed when we came in with the decentralization that had happened in previous years was there was some duplication of grants. You know, if you can get, if Rec and Parks has got a couple of grants and DPW has a pot of money, hey, I need my project funded, I'm going to ask them both. And so we had some concern that the grant money wasn't going in a strategic way. There was some duplication. But one of the reasons it had been decentralized was there was a concern that there was too much concentration of, you know, who knows who getting the grants. So that's why we built our public process, and the community development ACDS helps administer that process. So if there's specific questions on the process, I can get you our grant application stuff and provide that to Ms. Corby if she doesn't already have it.
Am I understanding at this point in time that you are favorable with the current process and would not recommend any changes at this time?
We have no recommendations for changes. In fact, there was some discussion at the council level of earmarking a certain amount for each council district, and we were not supportive of that.
Commissioner Kaufman.
Yeah, I would suggest that Councilmanic districts already have a funding stream. It's called the rest of the operating budget. And the fact of the matter is, unless we don't have, like, the only area where I would consider that this be a relevant charter revision is if we had insufficient applications for the money, and we could not identify enough nonprofit groups in the community to be able to spend the money that's allocated for the grants. That would be the only scenario where I think it would make sense at this time to direct specific funding. And again, I think it's well intentioned. I think at the end of the day, I applaud every single representative who wants to do the best for the people they serve. And I mean that very sincerely. There's no snark in that whatsoever. And I totally am aware that there may be a sense that some districts have more weight than others, therefore they get more money than others. And all of those things are in play and part of the discussion. And I'm not dismissing it. I'm simply saying that at this point in the ball game, I just don't think that assigning the Councilmanic district as being an eligible applicant for this particular pot of money does anything but potentially make that gap even worse. Because I think what you may end up finding is that, you know, projects that are super major projects that need a large revenue stream to be able to get across the finish line may end up boxing out a number of smaller projects that I think that community benefit programs are intended to be able to help support, so that you can have every community betterment project shouldn't have to be a 7 or 8 figure capital program. And so I can go back to mute.
Any other thoughts on item number 8 related to the special community benefit? My sentiment is similar to what's been expressed. I don't see a huge reason to upset the boat. I think that this just, to me, it's in the same category as the last item, where you can kind of create a runaround system. And as Mr. Barron shared, it just complicates a process which should be relatively equitable. And yeah, you could definitely run into issues, but ultimately, I think our hope, and perhaps overly idealistic hope, is that we would foster a better political environment in which different members could, you know, get momentum for the projects and initiatives that they're looking forward to. So I'm comfortable making a motion that we make no recommendation on number 8. Second. All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, well, that knocks those 3 out. Now, the next one, you guys can tell me your thoughts. Number 12, evaluate placing a local income tax. My concern is that
respectfully, that's number 9.
Number 9. I am all over the place. I'm sorry. I'm bouncing back and forth between documents here. Maybe anyway. So we are actually down 2 members, and this is actually a fairly important item. Whether or not we impose a local tax income cap. We can discuss it. I don't have a problem doing so. I would feel more comfortable if we had more people here for what would be a pretty substantial charter revision. Any thoughts on whether or not we should table this for the next meeting when we have a fuller group, or do we want to just go ahead and take it on now? Mr. Fleckenstein.
I guess my first question would be, and there may be some sense in making sure we get everyone's perspective on this, but what is the proposed difference between, or what would be different about this versus the tax revenue cap that we already have?
This is an income tax.
This is income tax. So I can give you just the background. Do you want just the background for it now?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sorry. Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, in the Tax General Article 10-106 of the State Code, it permits each county to set by ordinance or resolution county income tax equal to at least 2.25%. So that's the least, but not more than 3.2%, the most, of an individual's Maryland taxable income for a taxable year. And it continues at that rate until it's changed again by ordinance or resolution by the county. And a county can't increase it above 2.6% unless they hold a public hearing. And there are also some advertising requirements. So the county income tax is in section 4-4 101 of the county code. It was set in 2019 as 2.81% of the individual's Maryland taxable income. So it's above the base of 2.6, but below the max of 3.2. And that I'm aware of, unless I totally missed it, there's nothing in the charter that in any way addresses the county income tax rate. So,
if I may add to what Ms. Blair Klausmeyer said, I mean, there is effectively already a local income tax cap. It comes from the state at 3.2.
It can't go above 3.2. That's correct, or below 2.25. Yep.
This change would bring it at the county level. So if it ever changed at the state, the county would still be in effect, correct?
So I guess the notion is that the county would say we will not ever go above 3% as opposed to the 3.2 or something like that.
Right. Commissioner Fleckenstein.
Thank you. When we imposed our property tax cap, revenue cap, that was done by way of, if I recall correctly, that was by way of a referendum. I think it was on the ballot for the county, correct?
Yes.
As opposed
that is a charter, in the charter. Yep.
This would be as well.
Right. There's nothing currently in the charter, but if there was going to be, I guess the notion is you would put something in the charter that set that cap.
And so the anticipation would be that this would go on the ballot as well, not simply being a decision that the 5 or 6 or 7 of us would make.
Correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Kaufman.
Yeah, if I'm interpreting this correctly, it seems like what we're being asked to consider is, should we, the citizens of Anne Arundel County, put in place a protective measure to prevent the county government from imposing an income tax at its maximum capacity, right? At its maximum, but like to me, that's what we've been asked to consider: is should we have a safety gap that's between the minimum and maximum state allowable rate, and say that if you're living in Anne Arundel County, you don't have to worry about paying that top state that figure, because we've already said you're not going to be. So we're being asked to consider a income property tax cap in a similar philosophical mindset that we've imposed a property tax cap in the county. It seems to me, I mean, maybe I'm reading that wrong, but does that seem accurate?
I mean, yeah. I mean, the request is to impose a tax cap
because there's already one in place. I mean, we already have a state tax cap. So if we are imposing one for the county, it can only be less than the current rate that the state has allowed, because we can't exceed that. So it really would be something that is being asked and being considered to insulate us from the state potentially, let's say the state decides next year they're going to move that, that number up, and it goes to referendum and it passes. If we have a tax cap that's set at a certain figure, it's insulated somewhat from that movement at the state level. I think that seems to be the question ahead of us.
Commissioner Fleckenstein.
It also seems like we're not even really close to the state tax cap anyway. I mean, this sounds to me a little bit like a solution looking for a problem at this point in time more than anything else. I'm not seeing the need for this, or even why, when we do have the cap that's already there, that we're not even really close to.
Commissioner Hangleiter.
I believe, and I'm not positive, but isn't there legislation in front of the state at this time to increase it?
I am not aware. If I may, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I jumped in.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Brown.
I am not aware of any bills that would increase the local property tax cap. And just since it was referenced, for perspective, Anne Arundel is the fourth lowest income tax rate in the state. We are at just below Frederick. Only Garrett, Talbot, and Worcester are.
All right. I could tell you my position on this. I think that given the climate that we're in, given the circumstances that we're in, the economy, people's budgets are being crunched in an incredible way, and we have seen at the national level, potentially at the state level, we just don't really have a clue where things are going. Given the propensity of governments to spend beyond their means, and the propensity of aggressive expansions, we've been talking quite a bit about a desire to, bring on paid council members and, full-time staff. And I think that the appetite is very, very strong to vastly expand the base of government. And I think that a lot of people are dealing with an incredible amount of uncertainty about how they're going to balance, what they're doing with their lives against what the government ambitions and, what the politicians are eager to do. And so I'm very much in favor of at least giving the voters an opportunity to provide guidance and input for potential administrations on how they would like to direct spending. This is one of those items that touches everybody's life. It's an income tax. It's something where everybody gets a paycheck. Every last one of us remembers the first time we got our job and got our first paycheck and how much we didn't get. Like, this is something that's just universal. And so I see an incredible amount of value in putting this before the voters, if for no other reason than to inform potential administrations and people that are governing policies where the people of Anne Arundel County are as it relates to income taxes. And so I don't know what the number should be necessarily. Obviously, there's a discussion, maybe just matching it to where the state is, who can tell, but any measure to protect taxpayers, even though we're not necessarily close to it right now, all of us are keenly aware of how quickly that can change. I mean, I don't know. That's just my sentiment. And I think that, given where we are in today's political climate, I have no illusions that we're all going to, come to see eye to eye on this one. But I, for one, am extremely supportive of at least considering giving the voters an opportunity to weigh in on an income tax cap, because it so directly impacts every individual person. Commissioner Telford.
Larry Telford, is there a specific number associated with item number 9, though?
Not that
are we talking about 3.3? Are we talking about 3? Is the county council asking really a two-part question here? Do we want to place a limit? And if so, what is that limit? I mean, in theory, 10% is a limit. It's just probably not the limit they were thinking about, or at least some of them. It seems to me that there'd be some clarity for me if we actually had a number we were talking about for item 9.
So I interpreted this as assessing the appetite for a income tax limit. And I'm not aware of any specific numbers that are out there. If we're looking at this as a protective measure, right, a measure to kind of, create a buffer, between us and the state, I imagine it would be very similar to where the state is. So, that's my vision, would be that we kind of figure out where the state is and then try to maybe put a bookmark there to say this is, here and no further kind of thing. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Well, Mr. Snow, would you be in favor of amending item 9 to actually put a number in there?
I honestly, personally, I feel that if we're sending this back to the council for a recommendation, I would rather the number be informed by, I don't know, a lot more analysis there. So I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I don't feel equipped to offer a specific number at this point in time. I think that we're communicating to the council that we feel that the voters of Anne Arundel County should weigh in on whether or not there should be a tax limit on their income. And so I would personally be most comfortable with that language.
Okay.
Commissioner Fleckenstein.
Thank you. And I think Mr. Telford's question is a great one. It would seem to me that if we were to do it, that we probably would want to have a discussion about a potential number. But all that said, and I didn't mean to send us down a rabbit hole. I mean, I would have a million more questions before I'd feel comfortable going one way or the other. So I did not want to distract from what I thought was your initial good point, that perhaps this is a discussion that we really do want to try to have everyone's opinion. We may decide that we want to recommend that there's a cap, but we might want to recommend a particular number. Who knows? I can tell you, I would have a million more questions on how this whole thing would work that I know we don't really have the time for right now. And I think you're right. I think to get everybody's opinion, or as many as possible, makes the most sense. So I did not mean to open up the whole big ball of wax. I think your inclination at the beginning was the right one.
Yeah, well, I mean, this really is one of those political philosophy questions, and to me, this is one of those linchpin deciding moments where I do think that, you know, I think it would be a really big thing if we were able to come to some sort of consensus and make a recommendation that's fair on this point, because, you know, it's not lost on anyone. There's a lot of people real concerned. So thank you for your thoughts on that, Commissioner Fleming. Okay. Commissioner Kaufman.
I'm going to make a statement that I'm wholly aware is naive and idealistic and not realistic at all. So I apologize in advance for making this statement. I totally am a believer that voters have a chance every time there's a politician up for election to have their voice heard. I totally believe that every time we go to seek singular issue voices, whether it be like, I mean, when I first came into Anne Arundel County, the only thing, and again, remember, I'm a guy who came in as an educator into the school system, and the most frequent political conversation I had, or people had with me, was about the property tax cap. Like that was the most offensive thing to them. And then you've got the other people that I'd be talking to who would be talking about how it's the only thing that preserves us from just spending and just going bankrupt. And so my concern here is that we abdicate too much of our responsibility of being informed voters every time we put singular issues as being drivers. And again, I acknowledged on the front end of this that I totally get that it doesn't matter that I have an idealistic perspective of what our responsibility as an informed electorate is, but it is our responsibility. And so we can't necessarily view that the charter is the document that we hold people accountable for being educated about who they put in office. And that's one of the things that I think is lacking. And there's not a charter amendment that fixes that. So I would, whenever we talk about the people should have a say, I really do believe that happens. I just believe that people don't inform themselves in the complexities, and they want black and white simple answers to issues that are always complex. And they believe that a simple answer is the resolution to a complex problem. And that just isn't reality. And that's why there's so much discord. So I would be very hesitant when we have a set of parameters that we're not even dancing with at this time of approaching the high end of the limit. I would be hesitant to having us advance this as an issue that we're asking the general public to weigh in on, when they're not actually at the same time having to answer the question, then what spending reductions would you consider if our fire department came in and said that they needed to replace 5 of the engines? And in order to do that, we like it isn't just about how much of my income I'm willing to give up as a taxpayer, because it relates to how my council and my executive are spending that money as to whether or not I'm satisfied. So that is my soapbox. I swear I'll leave it on mute from now on for the rest of the night.
No, I mean, to me, the very fact that we're having this conversation was why I do feel, and perhaps overly idealistic on this. I do feel that really everyone should weigh in on this, and we really should get a more of a discussion. So is everyone okay punting this? And I mean, we did have some good discussion. I think that there's some good information to review, some good questions here. But are we okay pushing this to perhaps our next meeting when hopefully more people will be present to discuss it?
Sure.
And I saw Ashley's hand up, so I hope that I didn't dissuade you from weighing in. I apologize if my soapbox was a little too soapy.
No, that's okay. Everyone answered my questions, and I agree that I think it's something we all need to take some time and really look at it. There's quite a few documents out there that I haven't had the time, as we had such a full agenda today, in order to really dedicate that time. And since we're 2 people down, I'm fine with your suggestion, Commissioner Snow, to go ahead and wait until the next meeting, which would be the 28th.
All right, so then it sounds good. That'll be one more monkey for Chair Mansfield to deal with, and not me. That being said, there are a couple of other items on the agenda, not related to items from Resolution 5421. We have Article 8 from the county charter, which is the merit system. This might be a little unclear. Were we just going to generally discuss it to see if there were any changes, or was there an item that we're looking to address? Maybe I missed something.
Mr. Snow, there's no item that the council has asked you to specifically study. This is just an area where you all can review the article and ask any questions that you may have. You can hear from other people in the county. Just generally get an understanding to formulate if there's something you would like to amend or not.
So I could tell you, I kind of glanced through and didn't see anything that jumped out at me. Again, it not having, I think a commission like this, it's very much response driven, looking for issues and then trying to fix it. So I'm not aware of anything pressing from either of these articles. Just kind of glancing through it. Article 8 related to the merit system, Article 9 related to centralized purchasing. Half that stuff would make me go cross-eyed. So does anyone have anything they want to bring up related to those items?
We do have our personnel officer and our central services director here if you do have questions, because Mr. Snow, I have the same problem.
Perhaps we could ask from county staff, is there anything particular that you would like us to examine or address, or any pain points from either of these articles that you found in the execution of your duties that have impeded your ability to do your jobs effectively?
Ann Badowski, personnel officer. Good evening. At this point, I do not have any changes. I'm not sure if you're aware, but in the last cycle, 2 years ago, we did have 2 charter amendments for this section, which helped refine a few pieces. One was on 1,500 hours for our temporary contractual folks. And the other piece was the definition of a probationary period for our public safety people. And we are fine with those changes. It's working out, and we're implementing those as they've come into play starting January 1st of 21. So
thank you, Ms. Badowski. And thanks for being here tonight with us.
Sure.
Hi, Christine Anderson. I'm the Central Services Officer. I would give the same answer as Ms. Badowski did. We don't have any pending changes. I can't say that in a year or two I might not come up with something, but right now we are able to accommodate and all centralized purchasing functions in the county with the way that the charter is currently drafted.
Excellent. Commissioner Kaufman.
Is there anything about the to Commissioner Hanglighter's point earlier, there were a lot of words for us tonight to go through, and so admittedly this didn't get all of my attention. But is there anything about the rate of inflation that relates to any type of caps or levels of what's deemed a threshold that we need to be potentially concerned about, especially as it relates to any specific types of purchasing, whether it be smaller dollar? I mean, I would think probably in the smaller dollar purchasing, are there caps that you're concerned are going to hinder your ability to manage what will be more day-to-day operational activities, not $50 million, projects?
Sure. That's an excellent question, and I can make this easy for you. The charter establishes a minimum amount, but then the actual code that the county council would amend, I see the thumbs up, that sets the different limits. So there isn't anything that is holding us back in terms of inflationary pressure and being able to make purchases.
Perfect. So the minimum is in the charter is what, 3 pence?
3,000. Yes, sir.
Gotcha.
Well, excellent. Well, I fully came to this meeting expecting to be here till midnight, looking at the agenda. It is 9:20. We have made excellent time. I believe we have
less people makes it quicker.
Everything off the agenda. I don't see anything remaining. We do have some other business here. Our next meeting is going to be in person, so we'll get to see everybody on March the 28th. That is 2 weeks from now in the County Council chambers. Do we have a commitment from Mr. Kaufman to bring chocolate for everyone?
Well, I do. Before we get there, I do want to thank the 3 staff members who had a total of 37 seconds of questions and interaction for us, for being available for the entire time. If I do bring chocolate, you get it first. Even if you're not there, you'll get it on Tuesday.
I will make sure it is delivered.
Here's the secret. We'll stay all night if you don't ask us any hard questions. We're happy to support you.
About the fire. No.
Exactly.
Excellent. All right. So then we do have our next meeting. We will be discussing the remaining schedule at the next meeting. There is a work session for the county council to extend the deadline. I believe that will be taking place tomorrow, and then Ms. Corby will do an excellent job of keeping us up to date. Next meeting, we will be discussing Articles 10 and 12. So that's your homework, and there will be a quiz. And so we'll see how all of that goes out. Is there any other business, anything for the good of the order before we adjourn?
If I could just say, I did provide some suggested languages on some of the sections that we had previously discussed. I think it was 2 meetings ago. So I'm just pointing it out so that it's available for the next meeting to be discussed further the next meeting.
Yes, we can make sure that's on the agenda. Definitely would like to review that. Okay. Well, thank you all. Great meeting, great discussion. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right. And I'll second it. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Have a fantastic night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Take care, everybody. Nice job, Chairman Snow. Have a great night.
Thanks.